Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and, we're going to be looking at the final part of London 1851. And this is the final match. It's between Adolf Anderssen and Marmaduke Wyvill. Wyvill, I have no clue how to say that last name. And we're going to see, this is actually a pretty good final match, all things considered, The theory's not 100% modern. The theory, some of the style is very much not, ultra modern, but, overall it's a pretty good game. Now, in the first game, and they alternated colors. Now, this was, as far as I can tell, a first to 4 wins, I believe. It may have been, yeah. So 1, 2. Yeah, it was a first to 4 wins, draws not counting. Sorry about that. So, we're going to start with this first game. In this first game, I've done actually some analysis. Bishop c4 isn't really played today. Again, we see the Sicilian actually being advocated for in this tournament. And I'm actually shocked that Sicilian didn't become more en vogue in the era, considering how much it was played in this tournament. And it actually scored quite well in this tournament. So, again, another case where I'm actually somewhat surprised. Knight c6, that's pretty normal. Knight c3, e6, d3, I kind of disagree with. A more modern interpretation may be knight f3, d6, d4, cd, knight d. And we've got kind of a rouser Sicilian, and this is would be a much more modern way to play it. So we're going to go back and see what was played in the 1800s. d3, the bishop's out, so there's no problem with playing d3. And again, I'm actually a little bit surprised Anderssen didn't play knight f3 and d4, or just d4 right away, but, Anderssen wasn't a bad strategic player. We'll see this in this match. We've seen it a little bit in this tournament. Bishop f4 was played, though I think a lot of more modern players might consider bishop b3 first, with something along these lines being a position that I could see being reached. But bishop f4 was played, and actually Anderssen wound up having effectively a Marozzi bind. Queen e2 was what he played. I consider a4 just to control the position, knight e7, knight f3, knight c6, castles, and bishop e7 being something a little bit more modern of how to play this position. And maybe a5 is going to come up pretty soon, stuff like that. And I'm not saying queen e2 is bad, it's just kind of a different take on the position, right? Explaining the changes in how we play chess, compared to 170 years ago. Knight e7, castles, knight e6, bishop g3. So far, but from both players, the knight e7 and knight g6 maneuver is a little bit funky, but it's not bad. And, Anderssen's playing in a pretty modern way. It's a little bit aggressive, but it's warranted. Bishop g5 check, king b1, 5 e5, rook e8, queen g4. I'm not sure I agree with knight f8, but actually, no, it's the only move. Never mind. So, yeah, it's the only issue with the way Wyvill has played this game is that his pieces aren't so great. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not so keen on the knight e7 to knight g6 maneuver, is that it's a little bit vulnerable to stuff like that. And he hasn't gotten any of his queenside pieces out yet. Knight f. And we see Anderssen getting his pieces out and then using them. b5, okay, b5 prepares some development and it works on getting some stuff ready. Unfortunately, Anderssen uncorks beauty. Obviously, you can see the notation, but... And it's possible in this position, so you actually have to consider a move to stop that. And I think there's no real option. I think it's all pretty bad. 6 doesn't work. The knight has no good moves. I think d5 might be the move. And I'm not entirely sure I'd want to play d5. Because b5 isn't great, and what are your alternatives? So yeah, it's probably d5, and God, rook takes is probably the best. Just, no, you don't want this position. White's crushing here. So it's understandable that even if Wyvill did see d5, all he needs to see is rook takes d5. And truth is, the threat of bishop c7 is, for these guys, that's simple tactics. We're going to look at what happens if he takes first, which was not played in game. Knight f6, there, takes, and believe it or not, the best move is here, even though taking the queen is quite simply winning. Yeah. And mate's unavoidable in this position. So, and I think mate's just unavoidable now. Queen e7, yeah, knight f6, queen f6. Yeah, this is not going to end well for Wyvill. And we actually get to see Anderssen finish this off with a nice little tactic. So, rook d7 might not have been best, but whatever. That also might not have been best. I think... Actually, it may still be. 3 there. And this move sets up a tactic, and Wyvill did not see the tactic. Because the back rank is very weak, and Anderssen exploits it. Always be careful of your back rank. The obvious continuation is rook takes queen, and rook here. But Wyvill resigned because at the end of the day, he's not going to play that variation, and even if he plays something like f6, which is garbage... Actually, I think f6 is the best move. Yeah, exactly. f6 is the best move. Reality is, I think we just simplify this to a completely one game. Yeah, and white's crushing here. That's how I would play it, because that's just that simple. But yeah. I'm going to move on. No, we won't save this. So, round 2. Anderssen has showcased what he is famous for. Wyvill, with the white pieces, plays the English, and they get... they actually transpose to a Queen's Gambit declined. C5 isn't common these days, but it's not unheard of. I think c6 is a little bit more favorable or preferable. Both bishop e7 and bishop b4 have been played. I'm pretty sure g6 has been played, and what hasn't been played here, right? I'm pretty sure this has been played too, yeah. a6 has been played. I mean, seriously. But yeah, c5 is a move. It's just not ultra common these days. And we get a very symmetrical position, right? And they copy each other for a little bit, but here Anderssen deviates. And he could very easily play bishop e7 and castle, same as Wyvill, but he plays bishop b7, figuring that diagonal is going to open up and actually be good for him. And I would not be shocked to see this position in a... Other than other than these pawns being moved, I wouldn't be too shocked to see this position in a modern Super GM game. So, that's reasonable. That's a reasonable move. That's pretty reasonable. Might be a little bit of a stretch, but I'm not going to be too critical of it. Bishop e7, rook a1, cd4. I'm not entirely sure I agree with it, but okay, fair enough. It's not terrible because everything's covered up, so whatever. Queen h4. Knight d7 is an alternative, but it wasn't played, and it's a roughly equal position. Queen c7 was. Take the pawn, go there, knight goes there, hit the queen, do that. And this is where Anderssen likes his tactics a bit too much. So he allows his king to get stuck in the center. And that's really the only thing I'm truly critical of the way Anderssen plays, is he's a little reckless with his king. That and his strategic play is not quite up to, snuff. This is a nice little tactic. Materials equal. Well, not quite equal. White has an extra pawn. Anderssen does that. And you actually get to see this isn't bad ending play. I'll give both Anderssen and Wyvill credit. This is not terrible for an ending from this era. Now, why Anderssen didn't defend the pawn, I'm not so sure, but rook takes, king takes pawn, it's a position. Anderssen's doing okay, and they agreed to a draw here. And yeah, I kind of agree. It's a draw. Well, this is 1, 2, 3. It's a 7-piece. I'm not so It's a 7-piece ending. This is a table-based position. They agreed to a draw though. So Anderssen leads after 2 games, 1-0, or 1.5 to a half. We see in game 3 another Sicilian, and okay, so this is the old way of playing, the 1800s way of playing the Sicilian. Now we know that the light squared bishop belongs on e2 or c4, maybe b5 in some variations. It doesn't belong on d3, not yet at least. Yeah, and the knight probably doesn't belong there either, but... And Anderssen figures, okay, he can start an attack on the king side. Wyvill works on locking it up and expanding in the center. He's got the d4 square, so why not? Kind of disagree with all those exchanges, but the king side is completely blocked up. Black has a pretty good knight on e3. And this game is okay. Yeah. And Anderssen kind of gets his pieces stuck, and unfortunately, he doesn't really have much to do in this position. I wouldn't say it's like a zugzwang. And actually, I'd argue that Anderssen probably should play, a4 and just start shuffling his king. Because that would probably secure the draw, because I'm not quite sure how black actually makes progress here. Because if you push this pawn, we could probably take it with this rook and control the d file. And if you break here, I think we just take it with the bishop, and Oh, great. That's just a pawn. So there's no good pawn stacks. I would personally play a4 here. And just basically ask black, what are you actually doing? I'm not sold on black's position. I mean, I'm not sold on white's position. But c3 is just a strategic blunder. Like, it's probably the worst move in the position. Hilariously, my engine suggests it. So, you know how good that is. c4, I would never take that pawn. I would actually consider playing... I would play... well, the issue is f2, but whatever. I would never take that pawn. I'd consider c4. Just lock up the position. But just opening it up like that and opening those files allows black to get active. And even if the engine says this is good for white, I wouldn't believe it. Like, I don't understand how this is... Because white's now defending. Did black just blunder? What's the... Oh, yeah, it's not a blunder. You trade on d4. And the queen infiltrates. And see, now the engine says black is better. And the problem is you can't take here. Of course, the engine says the king is a blunder, but I would never consider this position equal. Maybe something like this is more resilient. But you could not pay me to get this, to deal with this position. Because is white, what am I doing here? What's my end goal here? I may just have to... Do I play h3? No, that's garbage. Like, what do I actually do in this position? Ugh. That's just awful to have to play that move. Because your king is basically never getting safe, and... Yeah, I like black in this position. And that's supposedly following an engine line. Yeah, I think white misplayed this by just... Yeah, and then of course getting destroyed like that. I don't agree with opening up the game when your pieces are all on the king side. I don't agree with opening up the game on the queen side when your pieces are on the king side and your king is vulnerable to a queen side attack. I don't agree with that. So Anderssen could have played a little bit better from a strategic perspective, but he was all in on the king side attack, and he unfortunately allowed counterplay. Moving on to the next game, remember the score is now tied 1-1, and we have a Dutch defense, or technically it's an Anglo-Dutch. E3, I wouldn't see E3 played today. I'd probably see D4, G6, G3, Knight F3, stuff like that. E3 is a little bit, but okay, it could be played. E6 is reasonable. More modern is to play G6. Bishop E2, that's pretty reasonable. I probably played Knight F3, but whatever. Bishop B4, that's reasonable. I'm not a big fan of that, simply because you lose a tempo. Though, it does a lot of structural weakness around the king, so from a strategic perspective, it's okay. But you have, in some regards, made a pass on your move. Castles, F4, I don't like F4. I would like D4, Knight F3, A3, stuff like that. F4 I don't like. I don't like C5. I'd look at like knight c6. I'd look at d6, bishop, maybe more accurately, a little bit more concretely, maybe b6, and bishop to b7. Take advantage of that. But c5, knight f3 is reasonable. Knight c6, that's pretty good. Castles, I like it. I like ruining the structure. b6 is good. a4, I don't 100% like it, but I kind of get the idea. Bishop b7, queen c2, queen c7, knight g5 is a little bit aggressive, but okay. H3, okay, fair enough. Rook a to e8, Anderssen's working on the center, bishop e3. More working on the center, you know, covering the 7th rank. Maybe going to double up on either the E or the F files. Pretty reasonable. D4, expanding in the center, that's good. Rook g7, that's another plan, is to just go straight for the king. Bishop to e3, that's reasonable. You know, making that trade, so this trade actually takes away a defender from the king, while it doesn't really cost you any attackers unless you really consider that bishop on b7 an attacker. And that knight is going to c6 and then e4, so again, you're maybe even adding an attacker. What did I say? Basically adding an attacker that way. d5. Queen, yeah. Bringing it in, targeting weak squares, stuff like that. But there's not a lot that the queen does on e5 that it doesn't do on c7. On the other hand, it prepares against d6, so queen e5, it makes sense. King g2, I'm not sure I 100% agree. I think rook f3 maybe was slightly better. Try to provoke g4, even if it loses a piece. Yeah, I think it's trying to get a square for the knight, even though it has f2. Weirdly, white is kind of cramped here. King g2, h7. And then Anderssen finds a nice little tactic. And Wyvill resigns here because, well, rook h8 is devastating. Moving on, so Anderssen now leads 2-1 with a draw. And we see another Sicilian, and this time it's a Grand Prix attack. Yeah, it's kind of, actually, this isn't unreasonable. c4 is okay. I would prefer d4 here. So concretely, I'd prefer d4 here and here. And I'd say that, you know, white has a pretty solid position, if not for that. But, okay, Anderssen's protecting the pawn, doesn't want to, you know, wants to have the e4, c4 complex there. And this is all pretty reasonable. And Anderssen's, I think, already learned from his previous attempt at attacking the Wyvill Sicilian that he needs to be a little bit more careful. And Wyvill just misses a tactic. And his king got vulnerable. And for reference, this didn't happen because of here, I assume there, and there. And now you have to, yeah, it's all over but the crying, right? And Wyvill resigned. Now, it took me a little bit to figure out why he resigned. And, well, the basic problem is that the best move just gets hammered. So if you're trying to maintain protection of everything, try to force a trade of queens, or as were the case, this actually threatens mate, but it is bad because it allows rook e7, and, well, this fails miserably because well, we win the queen, so. And obviously, same thing happens here, just it's a little bit more concrete, so. Instead, after a little bit of thinking, Engine likes that, and, well, that's a queen, and you are down an entire queen, and there is no compensation. So, Wyvill resigned after bishop c3. And we're not going to save the analysis there. Okay. Next game, Wyvill had white again, and we actually wind up having a very similar position to the previous Anglo-Dutch game. And I'd say Anderssen's playing a little bit better at this point, but this is the 1850s, so strategic play isn't all that great. And I actually do prefer black in this position, though I'm not sure I 100% agree with how black is playing the position. And credit to Wyvill here for this exchange sacrifice, because it really showcases the power of two bishops versus, you know, a rook and a minor piece. Like, just brutal. Because, I mean, that is, from the time the exchange sack happens, we just see how devastating this position is. Just brutal. And, of course, using your passed pawn to neutralize counterplay, allowing you to just win a clean rook, be up a full piece. Like, that is brilliant. That is a nice positional concept and a nice ending concept. So, now it is 3-2 in favor of Anderssen. And we see another Sicilian. Other than, you know, the position of White's minor pieces and that he played d3 instead of d4, not an unreasonable position for both colors. I wouldn't see it played today, but, you know, it's certainly not a bad way to play it. Very nice to keep the bishop relevant in the game. f5. Okay, so Anderssen, both players by this point also knew they had to win, so they were more inclined to take chances. But f5 is just a great move. And Anderssen plays an exchange sack of his own. Except his is for tactical reasons. Threatening checkmate, and there's actually no defense. You have to do that. And Wyvill resigned, making Adolf Anderssen the winner of the London 1851 tournament, and probably and who I personally consider to be the world champion at the time, who a lot of people at this point, they said Anderssen is undisputedly the best player in the world. Just a great tournament from Anderssen. He won it handily. Anyway, next time on the World Championship matches, we're going to be watching what I think is actually a pretty good match, the Anderssen-Morphy match. Anyway, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.